Alrighty, folks, what's going on? I know it's been a bit since I've done a reaction video, but this one popped up on my channel recommendations and whatnot, so I wanted to take a look at it. Just from the title alone, and I'm just going by feel here, why I considered returning the Steam Deck. Operative word considered returning, which means he didn't. So I'm curious to see if this is a reasonably well argumented reason, or if it's going to be statement of facts that are opinion, like Quantum TV, which I'm hoping it's not the latter, because the latter would require a lot of yelling, ranting, and calling them a dumbass, and I'm just not in the mood really today, to be perfectly honest, for an aneurysm. So let's roll into it and see what this particular user here has got to say about the Steam Deck and why he considered returning it.
Deck is far from perfect. Absolutely could be the perfect device for you, and at times even feels somewhat magical. But I seriously considered returning the Steam Deck. Right now, the Steam Deck is available for anyone to buy without pre-ordering. You might be seeing this thing all over YouTube and wondering if it's the perfect device for you. But that question doesn't have a simple answer. Honestly, this device isn't for everyone. It's not gonna replace your full-fledged gaming PC or even your Nintendo Switch. But it just might be the perfect companion device if you love emulation or spend a lot of time in the Steam ecosystem. Let's start with the hardware. The first
So, if you spend a lot of time in the Steam ecosystem, yes and no. There are third-party options to get things like Epic Games Store, GOG games onto the device. I know right now, the way I have like Final Fantasy VII Remake is through the Epic Store, because I'm a fanboy and I'm be the first to admit it. And I didn't feel like waiting 6 months to a year like other Epic exclusives. So that's how I experience Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's using the Heroic Launcher, which is a third-party option. So that requires going into desktop mode and downloading it through Discover and all the other stuff. So for some people, that's not their MO. Then you end up having to go through and add Heroic into the Steam as a non-Steam game, and then it'll show up in the Deck UI. I get it. It's not for everybody. So if you're looking at this strictly from a console, I get it. It's not drop and play. If you're looking at this as replacing your gaming PC, well, that's relative onto what you expect from a gaming PC. If you're looking at this as a $400 gaming PC, yeah, you can get a pretty good experience for a $400 gaming PC. If you're looking at this as a $650 gaming PC, spend an extra $100 and you can go get like the Acer Swift X. I think it's the one with the 5800 or 5900 Ryzen processor and NVIDIA RTX 3050 for like 750-ish, give or take. That might be a better option for you. If portability is a big thing, then that's going to be a better option for you. It all depends really on what you're looking for. So I would say that this is a morphable device that you can use for a lot of different purposes, and it fits a lot of different niches. Honestly, for me, I could make this my generically big main PC. I mean, I have a Minis Forum Neptune, I think is the HG90 or HX90G, which is the Ryzen 9. It's a box yay big. I don't need something super powerful, so like that works perfectly fine for me. So again, it all depends on what you're looking for in the gaming experience and what matters more to you. Can this be better than a Switch? It depends. If you want Nintendo exclusives, then no, the Switch is your only go-to device. If you're multi-platform or whatever, yeah, then the Switch probably ain't the best piece of hardware. I can already tell you, having played, I love Xenoblade Chronicles 3, but the way that certain elements are done, you can see where the frame drops are. The best game I can compare on the Switch to anything on the Steam Deck was done by Platinum, and that is Astral Chain. That is the best game you will ever get out of the Switch hardware, bar none. From looks, graphics, gameplay, smooth gameplay, etc., load times, best game, period. So it depends what you're looking for. You are correct.
Impression is that this thing is large. The Steam Deck is a large black slate, similar in look to a Wii U tablet, but nicer. It has a big 7-inch LCD touchscreen with 1280 by 800 resolution, and the screen gets pretty bright.
Hey, somebody actually got the resolution right.
The entire chassis is made of a slightly textured hard plastic that doesn't feel like an expensive Apple device, but also doesn't feel as cheap as the aforementioned Wii U tablet. Overall, it feels nice in the hands. And for those who are sensitive to bright displays like me, it can also get pretty dim for indoor and night use. Overall though, it's hard to relate just how big the device really is. But despite the size of the device, it is actually pretty comfortable to use. The controls mimic an Xbox style controller with full-size analog sticks and good feeling A, B, X, Y buttons that are slightly smaller than an Xbox controller but feel very similar. The cross-style D-pad feels good too, tactile but not clicky, though quarter circle inputs feel a bit vague in my opinion, so it's not great for fighting games. The triggers are analog and have a good amount of travel, and above the triggers are some good feeling bumpers. If you're familiar with an Xbox style controller, the Steam Deck's controls will feel very comfortable. But because of the overall size of the device, if you have a medium or smaller size hands, the bumpers, L1 and R1, may be a little awkward to hit. Overall, the controls seem to be designed for medium to large size hands, but will likely be uncomfortable for smaller hands. There are also two nice trackpads with haptic vibration beneath the analog joysticks. I really like these trackpads. They can be used for navigation like mouse input or can be used in place of joysticks if you want. They do not click, but the haptics can simulate a click feeling similar to a MacBook trackpad. The trackpads are also important for games that would require mouse input. I haven't used the trackpads much in games, but after getting used to them in SteamOS and Windows, I think they're pretty good for navigation in a pinch. The coolest part of the controls though is the software. In SteamOS, you can completely customize all of the controls, including the trackpads, to do almost anything you want. You can even download user-made controller configurations, which could be really important, especially with emulation. On that note, there are also 4 extra programmable buttons on the back of the deck, similar to paddles you'd see on the Xbox Elite or SCUF controllers. What makes all of this customization work so well is that it's natively baked into SteamOS. SteamOS is the out-of-the-box software that Steam Deck runs. It is a Linux-based OS, but has an easy-use console-style skin on top. Setting up the Steam Deck is pretty easy too. You essentially just enter your Wi-Fi credentials when prompted and sign into your Steam account. If you don't have a Steam account, you could create one during the setup. One thing I'll mention is to make sure your Wi-Fi network stays consistent throughout the entire setup process, or you may be forced to delve into Linux desktop mode, as there is currently no way to change your Wi-Fi settings during setup. This is doubly important if you use any NOD broadcasting SSIDs or have an abnormally configured mesh network. After you're all set up, the Steam Deck interface is actually very simple. You're greeted with a row of all your recently played games similar to Switch or PS5. Honestly, if you plan to stick with games you buy from the Steam store, you may never need to leave this console-like interface. Overall, I think the interface is okay, but I'm not the biggest fan of recently played games that are not installed showing up in the list. You can also get to your full games library by scrolling to the end of your recent games list, just like the Switch, or by pressing the Steam button in the bottom left-hand corner and selecting the library option. You'll be using the Steam button quite a bit to view your library, exit games, adjust settings, and even access the game store. It can be a bit awkward to constantly have to hit the Steam button for all the most frequently used menus. It's a far stretch to reach, all the way down with your thumb. I'm sure the user experience for the deck will evolve and get better over time, but it works okay for now. So let's move on. The Steam Deck was built for the Steam store, and this is where the device shines. The store will default to show you games that are great on deck, which there are many, including Spider-Man Remastered, Apex Legends, Elden Ring, NBA 2K, and so much more. This is important to note because if you stay within the Steam ecosystem, the deck feels just like any other console. You just buy a game, install, and play it. And truthfully, these games run and look really good, with decent settings and at the native 800p resolution. You can definitely alter settings if you want, but I found that it's not necessary for most games. This thing can really make PC gaming simple, but the deck is far from perfect.
So that's kind of the point. The best, while this is like an open console, and it's kind of a weird concept for a lot of people to understand, that haven't understood that in a long time, because we're used in the last 15 years, give or take, we're used to buying a piece of hardware and we can't do anything with it. Last 10 years, probably, especially since Apple started thinning everything down, soldering stuff to boards, etc. And that's just from a hardware perspective. So we're really not used to something that's open. You can do whatever the hell you want with it. You can install Windows on it. Not the best experience, but you can install Windows on it. You can keep SteamOS. You can install different Linux distributions. You can replace every piece of the machine if you want. Valve doesn't give a shit. And that's kind of the thing. It's a really hard thing to wrap your brain around. And the fact that they don't limit it, even as it's a Steam device or a Valve device, you can still get access to those stores. You just have to put in the legwork. Whether or not you want to, that's another story. That's up to the user. What Valve does, and it's something that is not a lot of people are going to understand, is it empowers the user to use the damn device however you want. And it's a foreign concept. If you're a console gamer and if you're a PC gamer, the consoleized in version that you get with the deck UI and stuff is a foreign concept, because it seems too simple and it doesn't have all the dumb esoteric launchers that we have in PC gaming, GOG Galaxy and Uplay Connect and all the other garbage. So like, I get it, but I don't know. Like, I think people tend to view this in a very black or white kind of way. It's a console. It's a PC. It's a consoleized PC, and like he's saying, if you just go into it and this is a Steam console, you'll be fine. If you're coming from a PC gaming perspective and you view it as a PC gaming rig, you probably might be disappointed, but you might not, because you might like to tinker. And most PC gamers, hardcore PC gamers, those that are, I'm going to go regedit stuff and mess around with INI files, etc., they like to tinker. They like to break things and, go to Nexus mods and all the other stuff. That's up to them. This device empowers the user. There's a saying on a show that I know about that, Linux puts the PC or the personal computer back to being personal. And it's essentially what Valve's done. It's just, here's the default experience. Do whatever the hell you want with it. We don't care.
Even though I really like the deck, I'm not as in love with it as most of the reviews I've seen. If you have a large Steam library or there are specific games you want to play, I'd recommend checking to see if they're verified to work before picking up a Steam Deck, especially if you have no interest in tinkering. Let me say this. The Steam Deck, strictly as a handheld console device, is really good, and at times even feels somewhat magical. But I felt that the deck isn't just a console, but a full-fledged PC. And that reality is both wonderful and incredibly frustrating. I don't want this review to be too long, so I won't walk you through every failure and triumph I've had with the Steam Deck. But let me say that in the past few weeks, there have been many of both. What I will say is that the Steam Deck won't prevent you from installing games that aren't verified. And it won't stop you from entering the Linux desktop environment and installing non-Steam games or emulators. A perfect example of the roulette you can play with Steam Deck is that I installed Resident Evil 3 Remake via Steam, which is labeled as unsupported, but it worked great, even with mods. On the other hand, I installed a non-Steam version of Cyberpunk 2077, which is labeled as playable. Sometimes it worked great, and sometimes not at all. The point is, even outside of the great on the deck section, you have full freedom to do whatever you want. But just know you will need to tinker a lot to get things working properly. This is because the Steam Deck is run in Linux, but most of the games were developed to work on Windows. In order to work, most games need to run through compatibility layers that emulate Windows DirectX. These compatibility layers are Proton and for non-verified games. Finding the right Proton version can just be a matter of trial and error, with absolutely no obvious reason as to why one works and another doesn't. I want to be clear though, the fact that some of these games work at all is super cool, and I want to give Valve all the props for making this possible, especially for giving the user so much control. The issue I found myself is that I have tons of games from Epic Games Store, GOG, and not just Steam. Many of these games will crash or not work at all, unless you get the settings dialed in perfectly, which can be very time consuming and has no guarantees. As a matter of fact, after a few weeks with the device, it seemed that the Steam Deck wasn't for me. I found that the Switch was a better, lighter, and quieter option for smaller indie type games. And for larger experiences like Cyberpunk 2077, it just seems so much easier to get the game up and running on my outdated Windows desktop. And this is why I seriously considered returning the Steam Deck. Not because I didn't like it, but because I thought that I would have an easier time if I just saved the cash and upgraded my PC. But it's not too late to turn back now. And believe it or not, the Steam Deck has a few more cool tricks up its sleeve. The first being that you can install Windows on an SD card with official drivers from Valve
or
and
install it
AMD.
on the actual
Windows
drive.
allows you to play games that won't work on SteamOS like Fortnite. So I installed Windows 10, installed Fortnite, and gave it a try. And it worked. Then I tried Cyberpunk, and that worked well too. The only issue I noticed is that the controls on the deck don't have official Windows drivers, and I've personally noticed considerable input lag with some of the unofficial drivers floating around out there. So Windows is a pretty cool option, and shout out to Valve for making this even possible. But once again, it has issues. But what about emulation? Well, that's the other awesome trick that the Steam Deck has up its sleeve. The Steam Deck can emulate nearly every past console, and it's really easy to set up. You can install RetroArch from Linux Desktop Store and use the EmuDeck installer to easily set everything up. Just make sure you have your own ROMs and BIOS files. I've personally tested emulation with the GameCube and Wii, and without any tinkering, the games ran nearly perfectly. There were some stutters here and there that I'm sure could be ironed out by playing with the settings, but the deck is clearly very capable. And obviously older consoles like GBA, DS, PlayStation, and older will work great too. The best part is that all your emulated games can be ported into the SteamOS console interface and look and feel just like any other game you would buy from the Steam store. The Steam Deck isn't perfect. It has a tons of pros and cons. For example, it has a really great controller layout. It's a completely open ecosystem that doesn't force you to use just Steam games or SteamOS. It is a great value compared to the competition. Has a huge library of AAA and indie titles that are verified to work. Allows you so much customization of settings including screen refresh rate, frame rate caps, texture filtering, and power consumption limits. Is a very capable gaming handheld that is able to play most modern games, and is possibly the most capable portable emulation device that exists. But it also can require a lot of time to get unverified or non-Steam games to work. Those modern gaming experiences will tank battery life in about an hour and a half. It is much bigger, louder, and heavier than something like the Switch. Seems to have slightly more controller latency than most other gaming consoles, especially in Windows, where there are no official controller drivers. Look, I can talk about the Steam Deck all day. There's honestly so much to say that is hard to express in one video. But to summarize, I think the Steam Deck is a very good handheld console that you should consider picking up if you are heavily invested in the Steam ecosystem, or you really want a cool piece of tech to play around with. I have no doubt that if Valve sticks with this idea that it will get better and better over time. But as for right now, this isn't the perfect device I thought it would be, at least not for me. Though it could be perfect for you if your favorite games on Steam are compatible, and you have good sized hands, and you aren't bothered by fan noise, and you're fine with tinkering, and you understand that AAA games will drain your battery pretty quick, the Steam Deck absolutely could be the perfect device for you.
Okay, so overall, I think his arguments, for the most part, are fairly reasonable. He's taking a non-unrealistic, not a unrealistic approach, is what I'm trying to say, how he views it, and that it is not a device for everybody, and that's perfectly fine. And I think there are certain things that he didn't mention, like he's talked about installing some EGS games and some GOG games and stuff, and trying those. If you want a native option, go into desktop mode, download the Heroic Game Launcher. That gives you your EGS and your GOG. And honestly, it's a better experience than EGS, which I find is 100% fucking garbage on really any platform. I mean, you can go the Lutris route, but then that introduces a whole other caveat of worms and et cetera, et cetera. But generically, I think his approach is fine. He's just giving an honest take on how he views it. I don't really think there's anything wrong with that. The ones that people seem to expect me to yell and scream and be a fanboy about, it's the perfect device. No, it's not. The battery life could be better. Not gonna lie, it does require tinkering. If you're not familiar with the Linux end of things, you have to have a willingness to learn that kind of stuff if you want to get like EGS and GOG and understand like different versions of Proton, and newer is usually not always better, et cetera, et cetera. Emulation and all the other stuff. So it all depends on what you're looking for in a device. For me, I think his review is fine. I think I would totally understand if he did return it because it didn't fit his bill. I think it is a better console than the Switch. The Switch has finally showed its age with things like Xenoblade Chronicles 3, that I started to see certain things like stuttering and all the other stuff, to now where we have things like the new Pokemon games, which are god awful as far as like performance and stuff. The Switch has shown its age. This is the Switch Pro that we've been yelling at Nintendo for since 2017, when they released a console with a mid-range 2015-16 processor. That's just what it is. So I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that if you're going to view it as a console, stick to the deck verified stuff. And if you happen to have a Steam library, stick to the deck verified stuff. Like I have 900 something games. Do I mess around with the unsupported games? Yeah, I'll fire up a version of Proton on them and just be like, hey, does it work? If it does, cool. But I don't really go out of my way to test everything. That's just not my shtick. So for me, I definitely agree with a lot of what he was saying. I'm not going to rag on really anything he had to say. I think his approach is reasonable. So what about you guys? Do you think his approach and his recommendation is reasonable? The way he looks at it is reasonable? And, I view the deck as it's a gaming console that happens to do some PC shit, but I grade it as a console, not as a PC. So to each their own. But what about you guys? How do you view the deck? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you comment, rate, subscribe, and I will catch you on the flip side.